And one more time, I'm going to put into the chat the link to the handout, because I know sometimes you don't get that if you join in a little later. All right, so we're going to be working off this handout today, this Google Doc. Everything that I'll refer to is linked off of this. I've put a Creative Commons license on it, so feel free to take it, modify it, use it, however you want to, whatever you want to do with it. All the work that you'll see here is work that I took from elsewhere as well. So just pass it on and add to it as well if you think there are things you want to in addition to it. I also want to thank Nicole Childrose, who you see on their screen. I asked Nicole to be here. Nicole is the co-chair of SCOA, which is the SUNY Council on Assessment, and she also works at Columbia Green she's a history faculty member, and she also does a lot of work around assessment and institutional effectiveness, and so she knows a lot more about the specifics of assessment than I do for sure. So I told her to asked her to show up, and if we had any technical questions, I thought Nicole would be able to handle them better than I would. She also teaches for our Institutional Effectiveness Certificate program, which I'll talk about later, but registration is now open for that program in case you want to do a deeper dive into assessment practices. So the courses start on May 21st, and the link to register is at the bottom of that page.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Nicole. Okay, so like I said, why don't we go ahead and get started. If you can, please just go in and say what you want to learn about today. But while you're doing that, I'll just note that, introduce myself. So I am the Academic Programs Manager at the SUNY Center for Professional Development. And looking through the list of folks who are here, I know many of you already. So many of you know that I was the Director of the Teaching and Learning Center at Brockport for about 10 years and left about 5 years ago to start working at the CPD. So one of the things that I do at the CPD is just try to maintain and facilitate a community of practice, so people who do faculty development across the campuses in SUNY. This webinar series is something that we've kind of started new this year. I mean, we've done webinars in the past for faculty development folks, but this year this is the fourth of 4 that we planned for this year, and I think we have pretty good attendance, so we plan on doing them again. We will archive all these webinars in our workplace group, which is the Faculty Development Community of Practice group, which many of you probably learned about this webinar from there. If you didn't, I'll talk about later, where it lives in workplace and how to get in there. It's an open group, so you can just find it and join it and ask questions and that sort of thing if you you have questions of colleagues in SUNY about faculty development. So let me just go into the Google Doc for today and see what you've all like to learn for today. I'm actually going to turn my camera off too, so we can have the full screen here. Ideas for assessing faculty mentoring program. Okay, so a specific program. Best practices, certainly address that. How to assess programs, types of faculty development programs. Okay, definitely we'll do that. Okay, and yeah, just keep filling that out, please. I'd like to have a record. I mean, I have all your emails and stuff, but I'd like to know who was here versus like who registered. So keep filling that out, and I will return to it, maybe halfway through to see if there's anything that we haven't addressed yet. So like I said, all the links, if you've joined us late, are all on this handout. And I will one more time put the handout in the chat so that we have some from Charleston, South Carolina. That's pretty cool. Okay, welcome. So the first thing, and like I said, this is going to be an interactive webinar. And so I've another link here. I know a lot of you are still in that first link, but for those of you that already did the first link, if you can go to the second link and fill this out. I'm curious to hear about what sort of things you've already done to assess or evaluate the impact of your faculty development programs. Again, I don't think there are many experts in this topic. I don't think we're going to find that, there's someone that has all the answers. So I think if we're going to learn effectively about this topic, we all need to kind of pool together what we've done and what we know. So I'll revisit that in a second, but after you have the chance to do the first Google Doc and saying who you are and what you want to learn, if you can go in and say what you've done to assess or evaluate, and you can tell there I put in, your name and campus as optional. So if you want to say I've done nothing and you're embarrassed by that, I wouldn't be, because you wouldn't be alone. You could just say I've done nothing. That's fine. The one thing I do want to emphasize at the beginning of this session is that this quote from the Beach et al. Book in 2016, which is about evidence-based faculty development, and that, we shouldn't be we don't need to become educational researchers to demonstrate the worth of our programs. We all have a lot on our plates, whether you're working as a director in a faculty development center, a center for teaching and learning, or you're a faculty member kind of working on an individual program, or you're just kind of interested and you're doing other things on your campus. We all have enough on our plates to do what we're supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis. Again, that's not an excuse not to do assessment. I think that, the other thing I hope to convince you of today is that assessment is something that is important, and it's something that should be a valuable experience and exercise, something that, you can learn from, and also your campus can benefit from. So even though it's an important activity, it's something we should all be doing, it's not something that you need to necessarily be an expert in to do it well. So hopefully by the end of the session today, you'll have some ideas about, where you want to focus the kind of assessment activities that you want to do on your campus, and you'll be able to sort of at least know where to look for tools to how to do that. So I'm just going to go and look at sort of what you've already been doing. Qualitative assessments, numbers of attendees, faculties, departments, divisions. Yeah, so when I was at Brockport, that's what I did. Pretty much all of what we did. We did, counted numbers. We, tried to every year kind of, and I remember that magic number every year. I'd have, I'd put at the very top of our annual report, how many people did our Center for Teaching and Learning, how many people participated in either one of our events or utilized one of our services. And, that number kind of meant a lot to me, because it meant that, we were having an impact on this many people, and it really, I wanted to put that top center in our report, to the people that I reported to just show them that we were getting to people, and we were, at least our services, our events were being utilized. And that's important, but I'm guessing that many of you want to go beyond that today, or want to go beyond that, in general, in terms of what you're assessing. I think that, like I said, numbers are important, but they only tell a part of the story. So let's look at what else you've said. Developing a faculty mentor, let's think about assessing. Surveys, yep. So the other thing that all of us probably do is have a survey after events, usually a satisfaction survey, or just a survey about how the event went. And and I did many different types of surveys throughout when I worked at Brockport, and we do them at the CPD obviously as well. And surveys are important as well, and something that, again, is another thing that you should have in your toolbox as well. So again, number of attendees, satisfaction surveys, incentives. Find it attractive as well. A holistic structure and meet needs of faculty. Okay, that's interesting. Yep. Satisfaction surveys, number of attendees, pre-post surveys. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Pre-post surveys to measure confidence levels of course objectives. So yeah, that's another, I think, way to go about doing an assessment is to, focus in on a specific program and look at, attitudes or practices of faculty before, right? And then sort of have them go through some kind of a program and then implement it in their courses, and then later kind of report on, how, they implemented that, or what they did, and if they changed over time. So, all right. Targeted surveys. All right. Great. So if you have any questions as we go along, like I said, feel free to jump in, either say something, or post in the chat. And like I said, we'll be monitoring the chat to make sure we get to your questions as we go along. So the first thing I want to start with today is just, if you go ahead through the handout for today, you'll see that there are just a number of sort of questions that I recommend that you ask if you want to go through this process of assessing your impact of your faculty development programs. And the very first thing that I think you should ask in any kind of assessment or any kind of process of evaluating the effectiveness of your program is to take a step back and ask, what are the goals of your program? What are you trying to accomplish? How does it sort of fit within your campus context and meet needs that you have on your campus and your faculty? Recently, POD, which is the Professional Organizational Development Network, which is the network of faculty development professionals throughout the United States, but also internationally, put out this a publication, which I have linked to here, which you can get for free online. It's relatively short, called Defining What Matters, the Guidelines to Comprehensive Center for Teaching and Learning Center Evaluation. So I almost considered sending this to everybody prior to the webinar who signed up, but I just figured I'd give it to you now. You could probably, after you get off this webinar, read the whole thing in just about a half an hour. It's relatively short, but I would recommend it as a good place to start any kind of assessment initiative that you have. The way it works, the way it's sort of set up is to think about, like I said, the goals of your center and what your role is on your campus. And as I turn my light back on, what you see there are 4 different sort of analogies for ways to think about your teaching and learning center. A hub, an incubator, a temple, and a sieve. And I like this because I don't think, and I'm going to ask you this in a second, but I don't think that any of you probably fall solely in one of these categories. But I think this is good, at least to start to think about maybe what you want to emphasize, so that then you could set up a good assessment to sort of look at whether or not you're doing what you want to emphasize in your campus. So if we start with the hub, this kind of analogy, or this they call it a heuristic for thinking about your faculty development programs or your teaching and learning center. If your center or your faculty development programs is like a hub, it's sort of a crucial component to implementing institutional initiatives. So if your center, your faculty development program is involved in collaborative campus-wide initiatives, if you do faculty learning communities that are interdisciplinary, or any other initiatives that bring together diverse stakeholders in your campus, you would sort of fall into this category. And when they came out with this guideline at POD, they actually asked all the attendees whether or not, what kind of model they most felt like their center fell into. And most people mentioned hub as the one that was the thing that they most resonated with them. The second one, the incubator, is where you focus on the development success of your stakeholders and your constituents. For most of you, that's faculty. However, some folks maybe are serving students as well. There are many faculty development programs that also do student support. So maybe it's students, or maybe you directly serve students in some way, shape, or form. And it could also be staff if you do more sort of general professional development on your campus. So the incubator model is really focusing on the development and success of your stakeholders and their growth and development. The temple analogy is a very more traditional role that teaching and learning centers and faculty development programs played in the past. You support innovative pedagogy. The teaching and learning center, or your space, is a safe space where it's confidential, and it's a place where you can work in your teaching. So you bring people in, you kind of give them that, again, that protected space to work on their teaching, to again, have that kind of protected space that they don't have to worry about all the other things that are going on, and so that's the temple one. And the last one is the sieve, and that one is more about kind of how do we advocate for research-based teaching practices, either through creating it, if you're lucky enough to be in a center where you have the staff and the folks who have the expertise and knowledge to create it, or by disseminating research about teaching and learning. I know of a number of campuses that are doing this kind of work on their campus, where they're really trying to advocate for the adoption of good teaching and learning practices, and advocate for practices that we know lead to increased student learning. So I'll stop there for a second because I want to, again, make this interactive. Before I do that, let me just see if there's anything in the chat.
Yeah, there's one question from Tonka.
Okay, so it was directed question to someone, to Kate at MUSC, so I'll let Kate address that. So here's what I would like to do now. And if you're following along on the document, I have hopefully this works well, I embedded a survey right there where you can answer what metaphor you think best describes your teaching and learning or faculty development program. So I'm going to just say unsure, and if you submit, you can see the responses here. So so there's 3 so far. So if you could fill that out, give everybody about a minute to do that. And I think as if I keep refreshing that, I will get responses. Okay. All right, so I'm going to, here, I'll post the document link. So if you just joined in, the document link is there. Oh, I think I put it in wrong. There you go. bit.ly SUNY FacDev Assess. So if you just joined us, you just scroll down a bit on that document and you'll see a link to the survey I'm asking everybody to fill out right now. So let's just wait. I'll wait one more minute just to see if anybody else fills it out. Okay, so far Hub and the Temple are kind of in the lead, which is interesting. Okay. Also, too, if you joined in late, you'll see it towards the top of the handout. There are some other things that I asked everyone to sort of report on. Who's here? What do you want to learn? And what have you already done? So if you want to fill that out as we go along too, that would be helpful. We'll revisit that later. All right, so let me just, I'll leave this open, but so it looks like a pretty even split between all of them, which is interesting. I think, I know that when I was at Brockport, I think I certainly thought of our center as a hub for things that were going on campus. And, and ironically enough, that was kind of difficult to maintain as a director. I was the only, there were 2 of us in the center when I was there, myself, an instructional designer, and then also a half-time administrative assistant. So having my center be a hub was exciting, and it was really cool in terms of being involved in a lot of projects on campus, but it really kind of led to burnout. I was going to a lot of meetings, and the kind of work that I wanted to do with faculty, either doing workshops or working with them on consulting, it kind of suffered, and it didn't really get the kind of prominence that I wanted to have because we were so involved in so many initiatives on campus. So I think one of the things to think about when you're looking or thinking about what your center is about, and sort of the emphasis of your center is sort of what kind of where are you most needed. There's some questions here if you are unsure about what metaphor best describes your center. Here's some good questions to ask that you might help you answer that. So who are your constituencies, and if you're primarily working with faculty and not with administrators or on administrative initiatives, you probably are going to be more on the incubator model or the temple model than the hub or even the sieve. what is the context and mission in which your program is embedded? Again, if it's really about supporting faculty, then, that's what you're going to, be doing, and not getting as involved in campus-wide initiatives. Resources are really important. So if you're just one person doing this work, you have to make choices about what you're going to do and what you're going to eventually assess, right? And then finally, where do you relate? I mean, are you in a centralized center for teaching and learning, or are you a faculty member just kind of leading one initiative? And that really is going to obviously affect what you do. So see, there's some questions here. Join late. Yes, pasting the Google Doc for you join late. There you go. So the other thing, actually, and this is actually pretty cool. So, and this was something that just was released at last year's pod meeting, is this ACE Center for Teaching and Learning Matrix. Just going to pull it up really quickly. There's a lot here. So they had a whole 90-minute session on this matrix. So I'm not going to go too into depth on it today. But what this represents work around benchmarking on centers for teaching and learning. So it goes into basically 3 different categories of your center for teaching and learning. So either beginning or developing, proficient and functioning, and then accomplished or exemplary. And if you go down, you'll see various kind of overarching categories. So the first one is around organizational structure. So if you're still kind of at the very beginning of the assessment process, it might be good, and you're at a teaching and learning center. I mean, you could probably use this for, a program that's not within a center. You might just not use all the items in the matrix. You might want to just do some benchmarking, and if you have staff or an advisory board, you can give them this document and say, hey, where do you think we're at in each of these areas? Are we beginning? Are we proficient? Are we accomplished? And then have a dialogue about, okay, where do we want to be, and where are we? So you could see the categories kind of go around organizational structure, resource allocation, and then programs and services. So I'll again let you kind of look at that on your own. Like I said, I think that benchmarking is really important. The other thing I'll say about this matrix, and they're very clear about it, it doesn't mean that you have to be exemplary in all those categories. I mean, I think that, again, you have to sort of sometimes make decisions about what sort of programs and what sort of things you want to emphasize, and others you kind of say, okay, we're just going to be doing that in a very basic fashion and not necessarily strive to be exemplary in this area, because that just doesn't align with what our campus wants to do. So this is probably a good spot to sort of pause and sort of just get a sense of if there are any questions or any comments, or is there anything you want me to go back over before we move on? And like I said, feel free to jump in, and if you have a microphone, unmute yourself and just say something. Yeah, I think, so I'm just looking at Dave's comment about his center being a hub as well on his campus. And, I think that it's one of those things where, when I started at Brockport, I felt like I was new to faculty development, and as many people are, and there aren't many people that go through faculty development graduate programs. I mean, most of us go through disciplinary programs and then end up in faculty development. And so, you're kind of, I just followed the model of, I'm going to throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. And, fortunately a lot did stick, but it also kind of, it raised expectations for what was possible. And, and we were pretty well resourced. I won't say we weren't well resourced. We had a lot of resources. We had a pretty good budget. But, again, it's not so much money that matters as much as it's people. And, like I said, we eventually did have a second staff member get hired about halfway through my time there. So that was helpful. But it really definitely, with the amount of things that we could have been involved in, or really wanted to be involved in, or were expected to be involved in, it did tax our time significantly. Yeah, that's a good question. Curious what size each centers are. So maybe if folks can just put in the chat, how many people you have employed in your center. So Keith's got 2, Dave's 1. Yeah, so if others could put in the chat how many people are employed in your center or how many people are involved in your faculty development initiative that you're here to think about. Okay. So I'm seeing a common theme here. Centers of 1. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I know at Empire State, your faculty development's not centralized. Okay. Okay. 4. Yep. And yeah. And Andrea, you're at a university center, so 4 is probably like a center of 1 at a smaller college. 2 that work with faculty. Okay. So yeah, just as I guessed, most of us are not at really super well-resourced centers. I mean, that's just, how things are in SUNY. And that's actually how things are nationally. I mean, if you look, there aren't many Ohio State, Michigan, other centers that are these sort of well-resourced centers that have, dozens of people working for them. That's really the exception more than anything else. We are all not alone, and that's why, again, this faculty development community practice, I think, is important for us in SUNY, is that we really have to rely on each other. All right, so moving on, again, feel free to keep posting in the chat. I'll keep jumping back to that as necessary. So the second thing I think to think about, after you, try to, after you think a little bit about what your mission and vision is, what your center's kind of purpose is on your campus, is to think about how it aligns with campus priorities. I mean, obviously, I think 1 and 2 you're going to do kind of at the same time, but one of the things I think is important to think about is there some area that you should be focusing on, or do all of your programs align with campus priorities? I know when I started at Brockport, we had a new president pretty much around the same time that I started, and one of his sort of key initiatives was to have the career span faculty development. The college wanted to do a better job retaining faculty across the career span and not necessarily losing folks after their first couple of years, or even as they're approaching tenure. That sort of was like, okay, that gave me sort of marching orders. Okay, so I looked around for programs that could appeal to faculty, whether they were new or mid-career or had more experience, and and I stumbled upon faculty learning communities as the answer to that, and that became a sort of signature program of our center. And so I think if you can do that, it will help you sort of prioritize, help you focus, and not necessarily feel like you need to be all things to all people. The other thing too, I think, to think about is who's your audience, and specifically, obviously, for your assessment, who you really want to communicate with. Is it just faculty? Probably not, right? There's probably folks in administration, whether it be deans or maybe not deans, or department chairs, or obviously the provost or the vice provost is going to be someone that's important to be able to communicate what you're doing to effectively. But you might you need to consider that carefully, because that's going to determine what kind of assessment, or what your assessment story is going to be as you start to put it together. The other thing to think about, and I know for me at Brockport, the primary assessment that we did was part of our annual report every year, and that went to the vice provost who oversaw our center. But some of you may be going through a program review process where the audience is a little broader than that, just who your reporting line, and so you probably can't expect that audience is going to have a lot of background knowledge to what you do, and so you're going to have to fill in gaps and be a little bit more explicit about how you're communicating the intentions of your program and what it's meant to do. Okay, so the fourth question I think is really important in terms of timing. I mean, like I said, in annual reports, you're trying to hit everything, right? So if you're doing 1-year assessments, you're usually just going in and so, okay, I'm going to look at every little thing I do and try to do some little assessment for everything, and add it all up. And that there's a place for that, right? But if you're fortunate enough to be able to be given, longer term assessment opportunities, you can really kind of dive in a little bit more in select areas each year and do a deep dive on a specific program, and then kind of follow up with the year after that with another program, and then that after that, and maybe do it in cycles where you're not sort of putting all your eggs in one basket every year and just maybe counting numbers or reporting on satisfaction surveys. But if you can advocate for having sort of longer term view of assessment, I think then you can really, like I said, focus in on whether or not folks are learning what you want them to be learning in your program, and whether or not it's having an impact on their teaching practices. All right, so I'm going to stop here again. So we're about halfway through, and just see if there's anything in the chat. Okay, so everyone's still talking about their center. All right, so I have another poll for everybody. So if you could click on this link. I'm curious about what you want to measure, what the impact on what. So if you can go here to this form, and we'll do unsure again. I'll give everybody, I hope people are going ahead, I like it. So I'll give everybody about a minute to fill out the survey. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I can address them while folks are filling out the survey. You all want it all, huh? Well, that's interesting. No one just wrote institutional impact, though. Interesting. Another minute. All right, so it looks like we're kind of stuck on 17 there. So we can stop that for now. Like I said, I'll keep it open, take a look at it later. So, what I have for the remainder of the session, a lot of it comes from another free resource that I recommend you check out. And specifically, there's a chapter, the third chapter in this white paper from the ACE organization. This was a collaboration with POD, and this is actually associated with that matrix that I showed you earlier. So this white paper came out when they were developing the matrix, and it talks a lot about assessing the impacts and outcomes of faculty development. And like I said, chapter 3 goes through a lot of the things that I'm going to go through for the next few questions. That gives you kind of a real, I think, again, a good starting point for doing faculty development assessment. Okay. So Dave wanted to put institutional impact and faculty. Okay. So looking at the first, in terms of institutional impact, I mean, I think, we all want to show, and I think in many ways, we're all kind of being required more and more to show that we're having impact on the institution, holistically speaking, right? That, we're in tight budget times, we have to be able to show that what we're doing matters on our campus, and, and it's aligning with what our campus is all about. So, there are a number of ways you could do that, and I think, as we said earlier, the one way we most do that is just report on how many people attended our events or utilized our services. And so, I want to highlight that I think you should all continue to do that. I think that that's kind of, I mean, we are in the service industry as developers, right? We are serving people predominantly on our campus. That's what we do, right? More than sort of we are knowledge creators or something like that. We are there to make sure that faculty are able to do their jobs effectively. And so I think, you know, the fact that we are serving a lot of people is a good thing. And I think that, you know, we should proudly say, you know, X number of people came through our doors or utilized our services and highlight that. But we should give it some context, right? Because there may be years where that ebbs and flows. Or we may have, you know, this is another thing that I always would struggle to sort of capture. We may have people that maybe they don't attend events or utilize services, but maybe they benefit from our programs outside of sort of attending our events or utilizing our services. And so, you know, of course, you're always going to get those sort of frequent flyers, those people that kind of come in and will, you know, you could put anything on and they'll come and they'll show up. If it's for food or whatever, or just the collegiality. I mean, I think that that's good to capture as well. So I guess what I would just say here is to, you know, keep counting people who come in, but make sure that in any assessment you do that you give it the proper context and you talk about, you know, why maybe numbers go up or down in certain programs, or why certain programs you should restrict the number of people or have lower numbers going through, and that's okay. But in other programs, you're really trying to reach a wide audience as well. The other thing too with satisfaction, I mean, I think that, you know, satisfaction surveys also are really important. Again, we are in a service industry. We should be making sure that the people that come through our events are, you know, satisfied with the quality of our events and all the other sort of things that go around doing events and providing services. The thing with this, I would say though, is that, you know, if you know people who are good at designing these surveys in your campus, get to know them better. You know, there's a lot of things you could do wrong with surveys that, you know, just look at many student evaluation or student evaluation of teaching questionnaires. You could see how surveys go wrong. So, you know, don't do the worst of the practices from those sort of surveys, but try to, you know, be mindful about, you know, good survey design, and also, you know, be consistent so that you're not comparing apples to oranges when you're looking at survey results across campuses. I know at the CPD, we always ask about just sort of like general kind of questions for all our events around sort of the quality of the materials, you know, the presenter, I'm forgetting them off the top of my head, but, you know, we have this sort of set number of questions we ask for all of our events with the same responses so that we can compare our events across the board. And so just make sure that you do that as well. Now, program quality is obviously the thing that we're most interested in, and they have some good examples for, you know, things to, you know, ways to assess program quality. I mean, I think that, you know, again, this, unlike surveys and looking at numbers of people served, this is going to take a deeper dive. You know, this is going to take more time. And so here, I would suggest that you know, you look at some of these options here, and you know, maybe make a choice based on the program, or make a choice based on your resources or the time that you have for doing this sort of thing, as to which, you know, which one of these activities you would use to look at your program quality. As we get into these items, you'll see they also kind of start to look a lot like looking at impact on teaching. But, you know, I think the key difference here is that you're looking sort of beyond just what faculty are doing in the classroom, but looking at sort of more globally how, you know, the quality of our programs. Are they aligned with principles of adult learning? I think that is something that it took a little while for me to learn what that meant. You know, most of us, before we start in faculty development, we start as teachers, or we're teaching college courses, and we kind of know, even though our students are adults, the things that motivate them, like grades, aren't going to motivate, obviously, faculty and others who use our programs. So we have to figure out what's going to motivate them, and then, you know, organize our programs around sort of principles of adult learning. And you can do a content review of your programs and see if the sort of incentives that you're offering. I mean, somebody mentioned in the comments earlier that you're rethinking the use of incentives for faculty development. You know, are those incentives ones that are in alignment with principles of adult learning or not? Again, you could do just a total content review of your programs, looking at the objectives. Are they research-based? Are they measurable? Are the activities aligned with your objectives? So anything you would do in assessing, you know, learning outcomes are the kind of things that you could do with your programs. And that was a big aha moment for me later in my career. It's like, oh, wow, so you mean good faculty development is a lot like good learning with the with the one sort of a difference that, you know, we have to think a little bit more about how our learners are motivated differently than maybe our students are. But, you know, all the other things are, you know, authentic activities, you know, being able to apply what they learn to their work and see how the application happens and that sort of thing. All right, this is good. Chat. So Keith said, some of our courses are employee professional development with instructors who have never taught before, trying to train instructors on teaching methods beyond a PowerPoint. Yes, exactly. All right, go beyond PowerPoint if at all necessary, if at all possible, for sure. All right, so there's, again, just some, you know, and if you have the time and can do longitudinal studies on the effect of cohorts of participants in your program, that I think it'd be a really cool thing to do. It's one thing that I had planned on doing with our faculty learning community program, but then I left Brockport. So, but that's, you know, if you could really do a deep dive and look at the effect of, you know, cohorts of people that go through a program, I think that's ideal. I want to pause here for a second on this last one, because I kind of feel like this one, for me at least, when I was at Brockport, this was something that I was always trying to do. And I'm just curious to see, you know, and in the white paper that I referred to before, the ACE white paper, you know, they mentioned looking at changes in teaching culture on your campus. You know, we're all in different contexts, right? So some of us are community colleges, some of us are 4 years, some of us are universities, and, you know, the teaching culture is different across. But I think what we're all trying to do is trying to get our faculty and our administration and our campus to value teaching and value teaching improvement and change the culture. So I'm just curious what you all think are ways that we can do that, because I think this is a really tough thing to do and a really tough thing to measure, but I'm sure it's possible. So I'm just going to pause here for a second and see if you all have some good ideas for how are we can signs, indicators, measures that show a positive change in teaching culture. Oh, good. Okay, so I like that first one, desire to share best practices. I mean, I'm guessing that many of you do what I did and, you know, have the faculty who I would see a lot at the programs, you know, present to each other. And so the more people that you have willing to do that is definitely a measure of changing the culture. So participation, sure, yep. Yeah, improve student retention numbers. I mean, you know, again, we'll get to in a minute the effect of our programs on student learning. And so I definitely think there are ways to show, maybe in specific programs, how our programs affect student retention. Administration buy-in, release time faculty, yep. If the administration starts to, you know, give you more resources, you definitely know that you're changing the culture. Increased discussion, better feedback from students, yeah, participation, administrative support. More requests for active learning classroom spaces, yep. W rates lowered. Yeah, so that teaching culture thing, I mean, you know, culture is basically our behaviors and our thoughts and, you know, our attitudes about our behaviors. So, I mean, I think I like this question as a segue to the sort of final two areas to look at, because I do think that, you know, when we think about what we want to do in changing our culture, we have to then start to drill down, as you're all doing now, into specifically, well, what is that going to look like? You know, how do we know if our campus's culture is changing? And a lot of that is going to be looking at the way we're impacting teaching on our campus. And you know, if anybody has specific ways they're doing things like this, I'd love to hear about them in the chat, or you can even put that in that changing culture document. You know, there are plenty of ways we could look at the impact on teaching. And, you know, with the one caveat with this 7 and with 8, I think, is that, you know, it is hard, and I'd probably rely on Nicole if she's back now to maybe chime in here, to sort of, when you're looking at, you know, at the effect of a program on someone's practice. You know, there are a lot of intervening variables there that sometimes are hard to control for. And I think that's especially the case when looking at how our programs are impacting student learning. That's not to say it's impossible to do. I just think that you always have to, I think, be a little bit careful that you don't, you know, say too much with the assessment that you do. Is that accurate, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I made some notes in the beginning, and I didn't want to jump in because, you know, timing and things, but I think back to point 1 on the program that you put together on thinking about the goals, I think that, and I see so many participants in the certificate courses are coming from, you know, these Center for Teaching and Learning areas, and there needs to be an intentional connection with the work that you're doing to the institutional learning outcomes, and for that to be connected to the mission of all of the work that you're doing, so that at the beginning there's an intentional connection that you can actually measure and see, like, where am I steering the needle, where's the movement, and then to tell your story, because you're all change agents. So how does the work that you're all doing connect back to the student? And maybe that's showing up in something like a program review or an assessment of the major, or maybe in strategic planning or budgeting. So I think those are pieces of alignment.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I hadn't thought of that. You know, when you're doing assessment, a deeper dive assessment, as opposed to just kind of these more general global assessments of numbers served and satisfaction, to really look at how you can align with other assessment initiatives on your campus, because, you know, there's no reason for you to go it alone on assessment. I think, you know, a lot of people feel like, oh, it's all on me to prove that what I'm doing is having an impact, when, you know, there are people thinking about this all the time, right? Is that sort of what you're suggesting? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Connect to others and see where your work is feeding other work. And maybe sometimes it is a direct, like, your unit to that bigger picture, but in many cases it's not. So why duplicate efforts? Tap into that.
Definitely, yeah. So, you know, 7 and 8, this is a case of, you know, do as I say, not as I do. I didn't do a lot of this at Brockport when I was there. I mean, we had talked about it, you know, and we had, you know, started to have plans. Our program review was actually scheduled right before I left. And I, to be honest, I mean, part of me was probably like, oh, I don't have to do that. But part of me was like, man, I really kind of wanted to go through that process of sort of looking at, you know, our programs and trying to do more direct measures of our impact. But again, so these are just some ways you could do that, and then some of them take a lot of time. Others, you know, maybe you can make alliances with other people on your campus, maybe faculty who are interested in this in terms of what their research is, right? I mean, that's something that you could maybe take advantage of, or, you know, somebody that, you know, has some release time to do some kind of program assessment kind of work. But, you know, again, so a lot of these things, it's with the caveat that they're easier to do with the appropriate time and resources. I see there's a question here. All right. I'll click on that later, Andrea. So the one thing, and I think, you know, the holy grail of our work is to see, you know, to figure out if what we're doing is having an impact on student learning. And I think, you know, again, there has been a lot of work in this area. There's a book that's listed in the references below, where they did a sort of detailed study of how faculty development impacts student learning. So many of you, I think, you know, what you're probably, with the resources you have, you know, probably your best approach is to kind of look at resources like that, you know, so where we know what the research says about what faculty development has the most impact on student learning, and then trying to adopt those conclusions to your context, right? So that you could refer to the research and be, you know, critically reflective about the types of programs that you're adopting and how they impact student learning. But some of you may have the opportunity and the resources to measure the specific impact of your programs on student learning. And again, here are just some ways you could do that. You could have specialists do direct analysis of a program. You could look at records and reports. And again, this goes without saying probably that, this would probably be for a select cohort of faculty that go through a very well-defined program. Some of you maybe have been involved with grants that did this. Someone mentioned DFW rates and their impact of programs on students. So our campus participated in a Gates-funded Next Generation Learn Challenge grant where we looked at students in high DFW rates for math, lower level math courses and sort of developmental English courses. And we redesigned those courses to be blended courses. And then they looked at the impact of DFW rates on those courses from a baseline to, after the redesign. And we basically contributed that data to a larger data set, right? So those are really good opportunities to do assessment if you can get of the impact of your programs on student learning, if you can get, grant funds or, and that sort of thing. I think that, looking out for those opportunities is something that you could work with your grants development person to do that.
Can I just add something, Chris?
Yes, please do.
One of the things that I'm seeing more and more, and again, this is all from just working with others, but I'm loving is they're doing some, especially there's some new technology opportunities that these folks are guiding faculty to better use or leverage, and then they're doing student focus groups, which seems really feasible to pull together, and they're gaining so much qualitative information.
Totally. Yeah, there's a well-known sort of model of doing student focus groups for faculty if you want to sort of learn, in the middle of a semester how a course is going. And I'm sure that model could be easily adopted to sort of look at faculty development programs as well. So we only have a few minutes left, and I really wanted to end on talking about closing the loop because, we have a course about closing the loop in the assessment program. And I think that, because this is what, assessment is all about, right? It's the data is part of it, the measurement is part of it, but it really is about how you're going to make changes based on what you learn. And I've put together with this question 10, and how to use it to elevate faculty development on your campus. Because as we saw from the chat, you're all probably under-resourced based on what your needs are on your campus. I mean, some more than others for sure, but I think we could all probably do a better job at, making the case to leadership that, we need to be doing more faculty development, that we need more resources for faculty development, and, and here's why, right? So if you have time, like I said, I have this is the last one, but I have, a document here and ways that you might be able to do this based on assessment results. And as you're doing that, I'll just kind of go through, what I have below it. And that is, there in that white paper that I mentioned earlier, the ACE white paper on institutional commitment to teaching excellence, they have some aspirational goals that you can sort of look to at maybe, and maybe pick one of these out and as something that you'd want to sort of focus on as a, blue sky or a long-term thing that you want to do on your campus. And I think number one is one that I think we probably all could aspire to, and that is, professionalizing faculty development, not having it be an afterthought, which unfortunately all too often it is. Oh, we have this great new piece of technology. Oh, but how are faculty to learn how to use it? Oh, we'll figure that out later, right? That's not kind of the way to go about it, right? Two, enlarge the influence of the dissenter or your program as a player on your campus. I mean, I think that for some of you, as we mentioned earlier, this could be a blessing, but also a bit of a curse if you're not well-resourced enough. And then I think number three is super important these days in that we have, a more diverse student body. And unfortunately, our faculty ranks are not sort of following suit to sort of meet the needs of our more diverse student body. And so, faculty development centers could play a role here to sort of, at the very least, help faculty be more aware about the needs that we have on our campuses to be more inclusive, and not only with our pedagogy, but also just the way we relate to each other as faculty. And so I think faculty development centers are sort of uniquely positioned on the campus to be able to help folks be more inclusive and more attentive to the needs created by having more diverse student body and everything that goes all around that. And the last thing I'll just mention quickly is this figure, which I liked. It's from the end of the white paper because it kind of shows, like, ideally, what your program kind of looks like in relation to teaching quality and student success. It's this sort of this process of trying to kind of have faculty kind of in this continuous process of improvement, and how that kind of is under the foundation of that is the commitment that the institution has to faculty development, but also student learning encompasses all of it, right? Because if students aren't learning effectively, right, the whole thing collapses, right? And that we're seeing that more and more now, right? I think gone are the days when people say, well, if I taught it, students must have learned it. I don't really hear anybody say that anymore, unless they're completely clueless or joking, right? So I think like I said, I like this graphic just to kind of show the ideal model that we'd like to end up with. So I'm just going to pop back in and see if there are any comments here for closing the loop. Oh yes, I didn't talk about micro-credentialing or badging. We do that at CPD, and I know some of you are doing that on your campus. It's a good way to kind of be able to track what folks are learning, but also incentivize them as well. Create a curiosity for faculty to seek out, implement strategies. You may have been demonstrating. Okay, all right. Provide scaffold approach, learning new strategies. Yeah, and so the scaffold approaching is really important. I think that faculty, like all learners, are at all different places, and we have to make sure that we're accommodating our early adopters or our people that are always going to sort of try the newest and greatest thing, but recognize that they're not the only ones that we're serving, that we have to also still have a place for those who are maybe taking baby steps to improve their teaching. Badging needs assessment, show data. Okay. Strategies in small bits, then rewriting their whole course. Right, exactly. I think that's we need to, again, not forget about the people who need to baby step things a little bit and not necessarily always, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? Be very pragmatic in how we're approaching our work. All right, so we're almost out of time. Is there anything else anybody wants to chime in with? Professionalizing faculty development is key, in my opinion. Yes, Linda, I agree. Any other thoughts or comments before I let you all go? And obviously you have the Google Doc here that is now yours to go take and have a resource. I will make a copy of the chat too, and when I post the recording in our workplace group, I'll make sure that I put a Google Doc with the chat there. And the only thing I guess I'll just say as I go is I do have some links here. As I said earlier, our institutional effectiveness certificate program starts May 21st. So if you want to do a deeper dive into how to do assessment in alignment with your institutional priorities and goals at your campus, then that's a good program to do. We also have one if you're doing more assessing student learning outcomes as well, that sort of also starts May 21st. Excuse me. And then I also gave you a few links to just sort of other things, local SUNY-wide assessment groups. This, as I mentioned, the SUNY Council on Assessment. If you're interested in that group, we're always looking for new members. I'm sure Nicole would welcome that for sure. There's an assessment group in Workplace if you have assessment-related questions. And then there's the Assessment Network of New York. I mean, obviously, it's not just SUNY doing assessment in higher ed. In New York, there's this larger network that includes the privates as well. And I know they have an annual meeting and they do great work and probably have lots of people that you could draw on as resources. And then, like I said, I have 2 pages of readings for you to kind of take a look at and start your work. So with that, I guess I'll just say good luck. I know I probably packed way more information in this than was probably good for an hour-long session. So once again, do as I say, not as I do. Don't try to do too much. As always, utilize the workplace group and our faculty development workplace group to ask questions of each other and that sort of thing. All right, and I'll just hang out. Maybe I'll stop the recording and I'll hang out if anybody wants to has any questions or wants to hang around. I'm happy to hang around a little longer.